Thanks for joining us for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham.
And I'm Charlene Aaron. Today on the broadcast, it can wipe out an entire coastline, and scientists say it's just a matter of time. Find out what's being done to protect America from tsunamis. But first, we go to the CBN newsroom for the latest updates on today's news.
News reports suggest the United States is building a case that would pin the blame for the downing of the Malaysian passenger jet over Ukraine on separatist forces supported by Russia. But in his press conference today, President Obama was sounding as if he didn't know who brought down the plane. Dale Hurd has the story.
The president criticized Russia and Vladimir Putin for the civil war Moscow has fomented in Ukraine. But when it came to who shot down Malaysian flight MH17, you might think you were listening to a spokesman for the Russian government. The president basically said, "We don't know."
What we know right now, what we have confidence in saying right now, is that a surface-to-air missile was fired, and that's what brought the jet down. I think it's too early for us to be able to guess what the intentions of those who might have launched the surface-to-air missile might have had.
But is that really all the U.S. knows? U.S. intelligence almost certainly tracked the missile hitting the plane and saw that it came from Russian-backed rebel forces. The Malaysian flight crashed just after the Russian-backed rebel leader boasted on a website of shooting down what he thought was a Ukrainian military plane. He wrote, "We warned them not to fly in our skies." Then the post was deleted. Contrasting sharply from President Obama's performance, Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott was clearly angry and minced no words as he pointed the finger squarely at Russia.
This is not an accident, it's a crime. I stress it's not an accident, it's a crime, and criminals should not be allowed to get away with what they've done.
The attack Thursday afternoon killed 298 people from nearly a dozen nations. 27 Australians, including these 3 children, flying with their grandfather, who was also killed. 189 from the Netherlands, 44 from Malaysia, 1 with dual Dutch-U.S. citizenship, and a large contingent of AIDS researchers heading to Australia. The president says he'll wait to see what investigators find out.
There has to be a credible international investigation into what happened. The UN Security Council has endorsed this investigation, and we will hold all its members, including Russia, to their word.
Dale Hurd, CBN News.
And Brigham McCown joins us now to talk about the investigation. He is a former Navy aviator and served in the Transportation Department during the Bush administration as a transportation and energy expert. Brigham, Samantha Power, the American ambassador to the United Nations, says there is credible evidence that pro-Russia separatists in eastern Ukraine and their Russian allies are responsible for the crash. What do you think at this point in time?
Well, based on what we've seen, it's obvious that it was a sophisticated ground-to-air missile system, what we call a surface-to-air missile. The Ukrainian separatists are known to have something called a buck missile launcher that can fire SA-11s or SA-17s even. Those have both the range and the missile envelope to reach the aircraft. A lot of people are saying that it's definitely come from Ukraine. Really, the remaining question is this something the Ukrainian separatists can do, or is this something that Russian or other advisors are really needed to pull off?
Okay, so parse that out just a little bit more for me. You're saying that the Ukrainians themselves have this, so it is still possible that the Ukrainians brought down this airplane?
Yeah, and you know, we're still reacting to information as it comes in, but something called a buck missile launcher, that's a self-propelled vehicle, looks sort of like a tank that can carry up to 4 missiles on top of it. It also has a radar assembly. One of those was taken from a Ukrainian base back at the end of June. And that missile system is capable of shooting down the aircraft. We've also heard reports, though, where other Russian Federation armed forces officers have said they doubted the Ukrainian separatists have the technology to use that type of system on their own. So there are a lot of facts that are still unknown, but what we do know is an unarmed civilian aircraft was shot out of the sky for no reason at all.
Mm. And does it lead you to believe that whoever brought it down, that they were mistaken, that they were not thinking it was a civilian, or is that not even possible to know right now?
You know, it's not possible to know, but it's hard to believe that any combatant would bring down an unarmed civilian airplane. That's certainly not a focus of the conflict. And we're going to have to wait to know until all that comes out. But I'll tell you, from 30,000+ feet, an aircraft that high up, it's fairly obvious to an individual on the ground that that aircraft poses no threat.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this. The president is calling for a credible investigation. Is that possible in the midst of this war-torn area?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult to assemble an international team or even request our NTSB or other international aviation experts to assemble. You have a crash site that's controlled by the separatists, and you have in the middle of an ongoing conflict. So that's going to be pretty hard to do.
Let me ask you this, too. Why was this airliner flying over eastern Ukraine? I understand that some airlines have chosen in recent days not to fly over that airspace.
Yeah, and, international civil aeronautics authorities that designate air corridors or air traffic routes, if you will, fail to take into account ongoing conflicts on the ground. And the thought is that the aircraft is so far removed when you're at 30,000+ feet, 5 to 6 miles in the air, that you have to be removed. But, for example, we have international flights over the top of Baghdad, through Afghanistan, in many areas. And I think this is going to cause those experts to rethink their flight paths.
All right. And one other question. You've done a lot in the energy field. Do you think that or how much of a factor is Ukraine's lack of energy and independence playing in all this conflict?
Well, it's huge, not only for Ukraine, but all of Western Europe and Eastern Europe. They've become dependent upon the Russian Federation for a lot of their natural gas supplies, and Ukraine wants to divest themselves of that dependence on Russia. But like most former Soviet or CIS-era states, they lack the sufficient infrastructure, and they lack the money to build those systems for themselves.
All right, Brigham McCown, thanks for your insights.
Thank you.
After 10 days and 2,000 Hamas rocket attacks, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced the launching of a ground operation into the Gaza Strip. Israeli tanks and troops have moved in, seeking to destroy terrorist tunnels and hideouts. So far, more than 20 Palestinians and 1 Israeli soldier have been reported killed. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell reports from the Israeli-Gaza border.
Israeli tanks and foot soldiers crossed the border fence into Gaza late Thursday evening, as seen in this footage from the IDF. The ground operation began several hours ago, and except for the occasional flare, Gaza City is locked in total darkness. And in that darkness, Hamas and Israel are locked in a life-and-death struggle. From midnight to mid-morning Friday, Israel attacked more than 100 terror targets throughout the Gaza Strip. The morning after the ground campaign began, explosions are still being heard from Gaza City as the IDF continues the next stage in Operation Protective Edge to stop rocket fire from Hamas-controlled territory. The IDF sent messages to Gazans to leave their homes in areas near the border and places of fighting. They warned them Israel would be using massive firepower. Israel says the goal of the extended operation is to uncover terror tunnels, destroy the Hamas infrastructure, and return quiet to southern Israeli communities.
The goal remains the same. The goal is to protect our people. I mean, over the last 10 days, we've had some 1,500 rockets fired by the terrorists in Gaza against our people. We've had barrage after barrage on our cities. And we are taking action, as I think any democratic government would do, to protect our people.
Friday morning, Hamas continued to fire rockets at southern Israeli communities, sending Israelis to their shelters.
Hamas have to be on the run. They cannot be an authority that is responsible for the Gaza Strip and expect to carry out terrorist attacks against us. They have to realize that there is a price to pay when you stand behind, initiate, and engage in terrorism.
For now, Israel seems to have limited backing from the international community. Even Egypt blamed Hamas for the ground incursion, saying that Hamas had refused attempts at a ceasefire. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Israeli-Gaza border.
20 rockets were found hidden in a vacant school in the Gaza Strip. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency found them. It is condemning those responsible, saying it shows blatant disrespect for international law. The United Nations also responded by saying at all times, and especially during escalations of violence, the sanctity and integrity of UN installations must be respected. It also said that the rocket stashed endangered civilians and staff working to assist refugees in Gaza. Well, back here in the U.S., a Denver bakery owner is appealing an order that forces his business to make wedding cakes for gay couples. Jack Phillips has asked an appeals court to reverse the order that he received from the Colorado Civil Rights Commission in May. It all started after a gay couple sued Phillips' Masterpiece Cake Shop in 2012 for him refusing to make a cake for their commitment ceremony. Phillips' attorneys say he is an artist and he should not be forced to use his talents to support a message that he opposes. Coming up, it can wipe out an entire coastline, strike with barely any warning, and scientists say it's just a matter of time. Now, from Graham and Charlene Aaron are back with more on the people who are protecting America from tsunamis.
Residents of a small Washington town and a nearby hospital are evacuating as wildfires close in on their homes. The county sheriff reports there have been no injuries so far. Fire officials have no estimate of how many houses have burned in the entire county, but some 40 homes have been reported destroyed thus far.
You're just looking at a fire that just came down over the hill, and it's probably going to wipe out all these houses right here. Mine is right up there, and it's under attack too, so I had to leave. I'm just trying to get these kids out of here.
We got all the family and the dogs out, and a house can be replaced. It's really something. It's even last night. I mean, it's way worse now, but last night it really looked like the cauldron of hell.
The sheriff said this is the worst fire he's seen in his 30 years on the force.
A powerful typhoon struck off the southern coast of China today. Typhoon Ramasan already killed at least 54 people in the Philippines. And before the storm struck in China, the southern region was already dealing with flooding from heavy rains, which killed at least 18 people. More than 26,000 people were evacuated from the island of Hainan ahead of the storm. Chinese officials say the typhoon is the most powerful storm in at least 9 years.
3 years ago, a monster tsunami hammered Japan with waves that topped 130 feet. And in 2004, a tsunami killed more than 200,000 people.
And that was one of a storm that was as powerful as 23,000 atomic bombs. But what about the United States? Are we prepared for such a disaster? Mark Martin traveled to Alaska to find out.
December 26, 2004. A magnitude 9 earthquake generates the world's deadliest tsunami in recorded history. The quake happened around 7 in the morning. By noon, the Indonesian tsunami killed more than 230,000 people as huge waves flooded coastlines around the Indian Ocean basin. It was a wake-up call for scientists.
One of the things we learned from that is that all coastal areas, no matter what we consider the threat, should be protected by a tsunami warning system.
Scientists at the West Coast and Alaska Tsunami Warning Center now also monitor the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, all potential targets. After the Indonesian tsunami, the U.S. stationed 2 scientists 24 hours a day at our warning centers, and the government invested heavily in tsunami detection equipment. The technology to monitor tsunamis has improved dramatically since 2004. Thanks in part to new forecasting software and computer modeling techniques, accuracy and warning times have improved.
When I first started here in 1986, our requirement was to get warnings out in 15 minutes. Today we average less than 3 minutes, right at 3 minutes for our response capabilities for events that are near U.S. or Canadian areas.
One example of advanced technology that's improved warning speed and accuracy is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's DART Tsunami Detection Buoy. DART stands for Deep Ocean Assessment and Reporting of Tsunami. Before the 2004 tsunami, only 6 buoys floated in the ocean. Now the U.S. has close to 40. They can measure a tsunami wave as small as 1 centimeter in the open ocean. The information is sent back to a warning center where scientists use computer technology to process it and then issue a forecast.
Today we can do a much better job of saying, your wave is going to arrive in 2 hours, 35 minutes approximately, and it's going to be 3 feet high.
No matter how sophisticated the technology, if people ignore the warnings, lives will be lost. That's where education comes in. As the NOAA Tsunami Program Manager for the Alaska region, it's Cindy Preller's job to get the word out.
We spend a lot of time with the kids in the schools because we've learned that children are the best teachers. And we have several interviews from children that have been through disasters, and so we really work with the kids as much as we can because the kids will actually teach their parents.
Lessons include, if you feel the ground shaking, duck, cover, hold, and count for 20 seconds. And if you're near the ocean, evacuate quickly.
We have, in Japan's case, in 2011, less than 2 minutes when the wave was actually arriving. So, I mean, you have to know what to do immediately as soon as you feel the ground shaking.
Scientists say a good rule to follow is to head 100 feet above sea level or a mile inland. Don't wait for sirens or other warnings.
No community is tsunami proof, but population centers can become what's called tsunami ready. I'm here along the coastline of the community of Seward, Alaska, where city leaders have set the example in making sure residents are prepared.
David Squires is a retired fire chief of Seward. On his watch, the city became an official tsunami-ready community by meeting communication and safety requirements established by NOAA's National Weather Service.
It's not if, it's when. It will happen again. And we've got to be prepared for that. There's an earthquake every day in the state of Alaska, someplace.
Around town, you'll find sirens, evacuation information, and signs marking the tsunami evacuation route and rendezvous area. Emergency managers here take it very seriously.
These are the guys that make the program work. Annually, we do a live code test every year to coincide with the anniversary of the Great Quake in '64.
March 27th, 1964. A large earthquake generated a deadly tsunami which destroyed the Seward coastline. Public Works Director W.C. Casey was 12 years old at the time and evacuated with his family.
My dad actually afterwards said that as we were going through the boat harbor area and up the hill, he actually saw the tidal wave coming behind us. Any coastal community, it's devastating, the power and awesomeness of a tsunami. It's amazing what that power will do in regards to infrastructure, and people are like ants in a tsunami.
That's why scientists work to hone their tsunami forecasting skills and encourage coastal dwellers and visitors to get educated and heed the warnings. Mark Martin, CBN News, Palmer and Seward, Alaska.
Up next, Persecuted, the must-see movie about an evangelist framed for murder after taking a stand for religious reform.
The new movie Persecuted opens in theaters today. It's about a well-known and respected evangelist who finds himself framed for murder and on trial.
That's what happens after he refuses to back a senator's proposition calling for sweeping religious reform. Wendy Griffith spoke with writer-director Daniel Lusko about the film.
There are those who claim that your ministry is intolerant, that your crusades may even threaten the freedoms of others.
Freedom is fragile and costly and must constantly be defended.
Daniel, what inspired you to write Persecuted?
The Holy Spirit inspired me to write Persecuted. I woke up one morning and it was there. The government is trying to take control of everything, including the very source that gave our country its foundation, which is biblical truth.
I cannot water down the gospel to advance.
James Remar plays lead character, evangelist John Luther.
Tell me about John Luther.
John Luther is the hero of our story, and he becomes a major evangelist at the level of a Billy Graham at a time when America becomes an unwelcoming environment for the gospel. And he's discredited. He is tarnished.
So, John, what is your opinion of the primary tenets of the Faith and Fairness Act?
Fox News anchor Gretchen Carlson and I both have roles in Persecuted. She as the news anchor who questions John Luther's motives, and myself as a legal expert who talks about Luther's checkered past.
And leaving the scene of an accident. Talk about a relapse.
So basically you have a famous evangelist, John Luther, who is framed for murder by a member of Congress because he's standing in the way of the sweeping religious reform. Is this really fantasy, or is this something that you could actually envision happening in America?
It really is beginning because we allow ourselves to be silenced in the name of political correctness.
Wendy Griffith, CBN News.
Wow.
What a story, I tell you.
Our very own Wendy Griffith.
I know, hitting the big screen. We'll be watching this weekend. Be sure to check it out. Stay with us. We are coming right back with more CBN News today.
Finally today, some unusual health news.
It is not just American people who are obese, so are their pets. And that's led to a rise of fat camps for fat cats and dogs. Take a look at this photo there. 53% of dogs are overweight or obese. And for cats, nearly 58% are fat. And those obese pets can have the same diseases as obese people, like diabetes, joint problems, heart disease, and a shorter lifespan. One reason? Owners give their pets an extra snack or two during the day. And get this, now luxury pet hotels and spas across the country will customize a fitness program for a pudgy dog or fat cat.
A spa program for a pet. Okay.
Money to burn.
That's going to do it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
Take the time to tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make it a fabulous Friday and a wonderful weekend.